Welcome to Kentucky Newsmakers. I'm Bill Bryant. Later, Kentucky Secretary of State Michael Adams will join us. We'll talk about the president's proposal to eliminate mail-in absentees and Kentucky's interesting voter registration trend that is going hard toward independence. That is later. But first, for decades, Central Kentucky was under the threat of a leak of nerve agent from the Bluegrass Army Depot near Richmond. After years of it being a well-kept secret, then public revelation and protests in the 1980s, a plan was eventually adopted to get rid of it. There are no more chemical weapons stored in Central Kentucky, and the disposal program is completely winding down. Craig Williams has been along for the whole ride. Once seen as a gadfly protester, he earned respect locally and in Frankfort and in Washington. Now he's glad to see the work that he and so many others did has paid off. Mr. Williams, thanks for coming. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you for having me, Bill.
For those who don't know the saga, how did there come to be nerve agent at the Bluegrass Army Depot, and how did it get on the public radar?
Well, they started moving in one of the agents, mustard agent, after World War II, and they decided to strategically place the vast array of chemical weapons, including nerve agents and mustard agents and so on, at various locations around the country so that they weren't all housed in one place. And they selected these Army depots to house some of the national stockpile of these weapons, with Richmond and Bluegrass Army Depot being one of those selected.
A pretty large population center.
Yes.
There it is nearby.
Yep.
Now, how did the public finally, in the 1980s, come to learn that it was there?
In 1984, there was the first public meeting held by the Army and their contractors, and they announced at that meeting that there were chemical weapons stored in the neighborhood, so to speak, and that they planned to incinerate them on site. There were approximately 300 people or so showed up for that first briefing, if you will, and at the end of the briefing, they asked, do people have any questions? And so I, like a lot of others, raised my hand, and 41 years later, here I am still dealing with it. But it was, once it was announced that it was there, they were still very cautious about identifying any specifics associated with what was there. They didn't say how much, what kind, that sort of thing.
So first you were demanding more information.
The first thing we did was we decided that we needed to have the public involved, because after all, it could affect the communities nearby and the people that work at the depot, and so on and so forth. So we asked for information, and begrudgingly over the years, we were told what was there, how much, how many weapons, what types of agents, so on and so forth. But they still insisted on combustion incineration as the way to get rid of this. We did a lot of research on what that could lead to and decided for ourselves, along with our experts, that that was not an acceptable way to dispose of this.
Lots of trips to Washington and other places to convince the policymakers that that wasn't the way to go.
Many, many trips.
And also there was at one point a consideration of transporting it out, right? And I recall when the cities of Richmond and Berea made local ordinances saying no train can go through their city limits carrying nerve agent.
Right. Well, yeah, they toyed around with moving it for quite a while, but those ordinances really wouldn't have stood up to federal dictates. However, Mitch McConnell, several years later, got a bill passed that prohibited interstate transportation of chemical warfare material. So at that point, all the sites that had it, including Kentucky, were locked into getting rid of it on site. The question became, how do you do it in the safest manner?
How legitimate were the concerns over the years that there could have been a catastrophic leak at the depot that would have been very difficult for the region to handle?
We were equivocating at first because we didn't have evidence of actual agent coming out of the incinerators at the other locations. We had information about other toxic and hazardous materials being emitted from the smokestacks, but not agent itself. In around 1989, we discovered some documentation that was provided to us by a congressional member that identified 14 live agent releases of nerve agent out the smokestack of these incinerators in Utah and out at Johnson Island in the Pacific. Once we had that information, our confidence in our opposition to their plan was elevated to a point where we were not going to allow them to do that in Richmond.
So did neutralization emerge as clearly the superior way to get rid of the agent that was leaking from those rusting old rockets?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. What happened was, once we got our congressional delegation and our state governor and attorney general and others to advocate on our behalf, the Army was forced to look at other ways, including neutralization. The difference between neutralization and incineration is incineration relies on air in and air out, and when that air goes out, it has contaminants in it, and if something goes wrong, agent is in it as well. Neutralization is done in a process that's in a vat. It's controlled. You mix in neutralant with the agent, you mix it up at temperature, and it degrades the agent until it's agent-free. You can control that throughout the whole process. So that's the one that was chosen.
How much cooperation did it take over the years to keep that disposal effort on track? And I know there were various times that the effort would run out of money. You have to go back to Congress and get money to do it. And as we said, you sort of evolved in terms of you were at times loud but always respectful of the Army, and people eventually, the leaders took you under their wings and said, this guy can show us some things we need to be looking at.
Well, that's true, and it's flattering that you would point that out, but it took a long time. But the reason is, as a senior staff person for the Armed Services Committee told me, said, you come to Washington with a negative proposal. We don't want this, we don't want that. Everybody's against something. You have to have something to suggest that would replace what you're against. That led us to an elongated process of hiring experts, scientists, and so on to identify alternative methods to do this that were much more controllable. And eventually that won the day congressionally, which led to the laws that prohibited the incineration in Kentucky.
The agent is largely gone at this point. And you predict that by late this year it will all be completely gone.
All the weapons are gone. These weapons contained chemical warfare agent in explosive contained weapons, very dangerous. What's left now is a small amount of contaminated rocket warheads that were exposed to agent during the decommissioning process. Those have been stored back in the igloos where the rockets originally were, and those are now being treated in the static detonation chambers that are located in the footprint of the D-mill plant. All the GB agent, which is the riskiest one, is gone. That's all gone, been gone for about a week and a half now, since all that GB is gone. And the reason it's more dangerous is because it volatilizes into the air quickly, whereas VX and mustard agent don't go anyplace. If you spill some, it stays there. But GB can go travel in the atmosphere. So all the GB's gone. The VX contaminated rocket motors, rocket warheads, should be gone by November and possibly October.
How much safer is this region because the nerve agent is gone?
I don't exactly know how to answer that without seeming like I'm overemphasizing the difference. Earlier on, when people would want to move to the Richmond area or Madison County or surrounding counties and they found out that this material was stored there in live munitions, a lot of people wouldn't move here. Now people are moving in, they hear about it, they know it's gone, they're relieved about it, the community's relieved about it. I mean, these are weapons of mass destruction. And you know what's interesting is the contractor and the Army working together got rid of over 101,000 explosively loaded chemical weapons without anybody getting exposed, nobody getting hurt seriously. I mean, it is a fantastic and astonishing record of safety that has gone on at this plant, and the community's been deeply involved in all of this, and that's what made the difference.
What lessons have you learned over 41 years in this effort?
If you believe in something for the right reasons and you're willing to speak truth to power and you're willing to do the research, put in the effort, and gather the community support, which is critical. I mean, I was kind of the tip of the spear for quite a long time, but without the county and the local governments and the state government and our delegation in Washington joining us, we wouldn't have accomplished what we've accomplished. So it takes a village. It takes a village. It takes Congress. It takes the state legislature. It takes everybody joined together to accomplish something like this against a bureaucracy as large as the Pentagon.
What seems to be the future at the depot? Will it still have you believe, a large military mission? I
have received information from the Joint Munitions Command, which is the organization within the Army that oversees all the depots. And we've asked them this question. There's been a lot of rumors. The depot's going to close down, we're going to lose all that employment, and so on. The status of it right now is at the highest levels within the Army, they're reviewing the missions of all the depots across the country. Whether Richmond's Bluegrass Army Depot will maintain its viability is up in the air because they haven't made a decision yet. But I can tell you this, there's a lot of people at the state, federal, and local level who are pushing hard to bring new job opportunities into the depot, to bring public-private partnerships from corporations that do defense work, not just Army people, not just military types, but private companies to come in and establish a setup at the depot in order to perpetuate its future as a conventional weapons depot, which is its normal duties.
Yeah. So it's very likely to have an important task in the future.
Many people hope so. It's when you get up that high in the Army echelon, you can't predict what might happen, because being in the Army myself, we've always said there's a right way, a wrong way, and an Army way of doing things. And how they work that out is still up in the air, but we're pulling for them.
At the end of all of this, what do you say to people in the region who helped you, some who may not have bought in, but they were concerned? What do you have to say as you complete this mission?
Well, I say congratulations to everyone who assisted us in getting the safest disposal process implemented. I say thank you for your support. For those of you who saw it the other way, I understand, everybody doesn't agree on everything, especially these days. But even those that were opposed to our efforts were respectful. We never really got into an animosity type of relationship with very, very few people, occasionally. But generally speaking, everyone's objective was identical. We all wanted to get this out of the community. We all wanted to do it very safely. We all wanted to get it done as quickly as possible. And because of the foot dragging by some of the military about how to do it, it took longer than we wanted or expected. But eventually, once the decision was made to abandon incineration, everybody was rowing in the same direction, and we got it done remarkably safely.
Craig Williams, thank you so much for coming by.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate you.
Stay with us. We'll be back with Kentucky Secretary of State Michael Adams on Kentucky Newsmakers in a moment. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers from WKYT. Kentucky Secretary of State Michael Adams is joining us now. During his tenure, Adams has worked to clean up Kentucky's voter rolls. Thousands of ineligible voters have been removed, including many who were deceased. This week, President Trump said he will lead a movement against mail-in ballots. We'll get the Secretary's thoughts on that. And the unmistakable surge in voter registration in Kentucky continues to be toward independence. Secretary Adams is joining us. We welcome you. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks. Great to be back.
As you've worked to clean up Kentucky's voter rolls over the years, how much improvement have you been able to make?
It's pretty significant. We've taken about 750,000 voters off the rolls. That includes Republicans from my own party, Democrats, Independents, people who have moved away, passed away, or been put away. 300,000 of those were people who were deceased. Some of them have been deceased for generations. We take this role very, very seriously. And to give you a sense of scope, we've got about 3.3 million voters on the rolls. So 750,000 is about a quarter. That's a massive share of our rolls that were just defunct.
And as I understand it, you have a request now from the Department of Justice to see the voting rolls.
Yes, it's actually more than that. We have a standard law that allows anyone to inspect our voter rolls, and we honor that law. This is a very unique request. It is a request for an electronic copy that includes people's personally identifying information like their social security numbers, their driver's license numbers. They made that request. I got it last week. And so we're going to review it. Certainly we'll cooperate with the administration. We'll provide them certainly what they're entitled to, but we're still sorting out what that is exactly. Are they entitled to inspect what the public can inspect as a public record, or do they get people's personal information? And if they do, what controls do they have to ensure there's no data breach? So we're running those items down, but again, we expect to cooperate.
And any time frame on that?
So federal law requires us as a holder of a voter roll to respond within 90 days. We've already responded. We sent a letter today. I'd like to have this resolved certainly well in advance of 3 months.
As the new voters come forward and register, you have noted independent or other party trends are continuing to surge. That means despite losing their vote in a primary, Kentuckians are largely deciding not to put a D or R by their name.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and it's a great big warning siren for my party and the other party as well, that we have now for each of the last 6 months more voters registering outside the two parties as within the two parties combined. That's a big deal because you self-disenfranchise if you register as independent or to a third party in Kentucky. That means you can't vote in the primary. And increasingly we're deciding our general election in the primary. As the state gets redder in some parts and bluer in other parts, you're basically deciding you don't want to vote in half the elections. But it is simply that important to so many voters to say, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican. The Democratic brand nationally is in free fall, not just in Kentucky. If you look, the New York Times had a feature this week about how Democratic registration and self-identification is plummeting across the country. So it's not unique to Kentucky. The Republicans have a challenge too, especially with young voters, and that's where most new voters come from, is young voters. And young voters are very anti-institution. They're not joiners. They're very dubious of politics, and so they're not joining the Republican Party either. And so the big question for our elections going forward is, what does this new group of voters do? They're going to be the fastest growing bloc, and someday they're going to be the biggest bloc.
Well, as that becomes a larger segment of the population, 12% now in the 6th district, I think, in this congressional race coming up, that could be decisive in a close election, right?
Yeah, it's no accident that every person who won the independent vote won election in 2023 when I was on the ballot. Andy Beshear won independence by 20 points. That's why he's still in office. I won independence also. That's why I'm still in office. And they split their tickets. Every election for constitutional office we've had this millennium, people have split their tickets and elected both Democrats and Republicans at the same time. So the political center in Kentucky is still bigger than what you see nationally. There's a lot of ticket splitting still in Kentucky.
So the parties don't know where these where the independent voters are headed, right? I mean, that must be intimidating to them.
And I want to discern between the notion of independent voters and moderate voters.
Yeah.
You can be independent and be very liberal or very conservative. This is not one cohesive group of people with the same ideology. These people are all over the map. They're not one block of people, but they do have one thing in common, which is they don't want to be part of a political party.
So how do the parties figure out how to communicate with those independents?
Well, certainly I have my own way of doing that, which is trying to reach everybody and be inclusive. But what you see increasingly in both parties is a desire to just talk to their own echo chamber, only focus on their own turnout of their own party, and ignore other people. And that's a massive mistake. If you look at Republican performance in 2023, when I was on the ballot, we actually had higher turnout than the Democrats had. But we still lost the governorship decisively because we're still having trouble finding those people who are not Republicans and talking to them and getting them to come our way. And to his credit, the governor is actually talking to his own party right now and telling them, guys, we're getting this all wrong. We've got to stop talking like we're in a grad school seminar and talk like real people to real people. And he's lecturing his party as well. So you do have these voices in the wilderness now on both sides saying to our parties, in the interest of our parties being successful, guys, let's not let's not alienate all these other people who are not part of our party. Republicans are doing pretty good, but we're still only 47% of registrants. That's not a majority. If we don't reach beyond our little echo chamber, we're going to lose.
Well, you do notice that more candidates out there on the stump mention the independents now, when when they make their plea to voters.
Yeah, but if you look at how they spend their money, they're putting more of their resources into ginning up their own turnout and less onto persuasion. And that's a rational thing to do. Fewer people are open to being persuaded right now. But as the center gets, certainly we have a center here that's pretty stable, but as the non-affiliation gets bigger, we're just going to have to be more creative for how we attract people into our coalition.
So, just how do you think, again, the politicians approach this growing segment of independent voters that you say someday, and we see in North Carolina, it's about outgrown the parties.
Yeah.
How do they appeal?
Well, I'll tell you how I do it, because I've been fortunately successful at it. I certainly explained to my base the promises I made to them. They got me nominated twice. How I've kept those promises, but I also go beyond just my own party's base and talk to other people and say, I serve you too. Here's what we're doing to make it easier for you to vote, even if you're voting against me. I think it's really important that we talk about solutions and not just focus on the outrage of the day on social media, what Cracker Barrel's sign looks like or whatever. Let's talk about jobs. Let's talk about education. Let's talk about stuff that impacts everybody if you really want to reach everybody.
You don't see it going back. You don't think that young voters are going to suddenly become partisan?
No, not this generation. And I'm the parent of an 18-year-old first-time voter last year. And she's registered Republican because she's loyal to her dad and wants to vote for me in primaries. But she's not a joiner. She's very dubious of both political parties, and that's what her friends are like too. They'll still vote. You can still reason with them and get them to come vote, but you got to reach out to them and explain what you're going to do that benefits them.
President Trump won Kentucky by 30 percentage points in November. He said this week he wants mail-in ballots ended, and he raises questions about voting machines, calling for the use of watermark paper, as he called it. Do you agree we should do away with mail-in ballots?
Well, we already have. We don't have that sort of voting in Kentucky. We never have had it. We've always, or at least since 1947, when we amended our state constitution to provide for absentee voting as a right, as a constitutional right, we've had absentee voting, including by mail. Most Kentuckians prefer to vote in person. That's true across the political spectrum. 2 to 4% of voters in any given election post-COVID vote by absentee ballot, and the rest vote in person. That's partly because we've expanded in-person voting under my watch, but it's also because that's just our tradition and our history. Even most Democrats who support mail-in voting don't want to actually do it. They want to go vote in person, and that's good. That's the gold standard. I don't think that what the president's talking about is going to have any impact on Kentucky, because we're not a mail-in voting state like Florida or Georgia or a lot of states around the country, red states and blue states both. With respect to the voting machines, I don't think he's talking about how we vote, which is by paper ballots that we scan electronically so we get a quick count and report on election night. I think he's talking about what we used to have before I took office, which were literally voting machines. They were just computers and you'd push a button. And I don't think those have been hacked or compromised, but I do think they're not the best way to vote. In 2018, before I was elected, we had a tied race for state representative in Owensboro, and the judge there ordered a recount. And they told the court, we can't. We don't have any ballots. We just have these computers. I think we have the best solution now, which is paper ballots that we can go back and count manually if we need to as a secondary measure, but we have paper ballots that we count electronically. That's the best of both worlds.
We're already hearing some candidates stir and announce their intentions for 2026. When can they actually file for office?
So under state law, certainly if they want to file with the Federal Election Commission to raise and spend money, they can do that whenever they like. But under state law, they can't file for the ballot until November 5th specifically for this cycle. And then we keep open filing until January 9th. Those dates are set by law. So we do expect a long line of candidates for Congress, for the legislature, for the courts, for you name it. Up and down the ballot will be coming to our new offices on US 60.
Your temporary
We've been
office.
evicted from the Capitol, unfortunately, as it's closed for refurbishing. But we expect a wide array of candidates for various offices, and we look forward to that.
You announced a Businesses Against Trafficking website to raise awareness about human trafficking this year. Is that increasing awareness?
Yeah, it is. We've actually gotten national attention for our efforts. I'm really proud of that. I want to give a shout out to Attorney General Russell Coleman. He's been a great partner on this front as on other fronts. Unfortunately, Kentucky is still at the top of all the categories we should be at the bottom at with respect to abuse, with respect to trafficking and other things. With an off year, a year I can talk about other stuff besides elections and get some attention. We wanted to raise awareness of trafficking. It is a problem. It's a modern day form of slavery. And so we've been all around the state, but also out of state, talking about this.
You are term limited. Have you decided what the future holds for you?
I honestly have not. And before I make a decision about 2027, I'll certainly have a lot of conversations. I'm already having some of those now. I've not made a final decision, but I'm looking at running for governor.
You would like to continue in office?
Yeah, I think so. I think the Republican Party needs a grown-up who will talk about education, talk about housing, talk about our in-state challenges, and not random stuff on social media. I think we need that.
But you're closely looking at the governor's race.
Very closely.
You slipped that in on me. All right. Secretary of State Michael Adams, thanks for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill.
We'll be back on Kentucky Newsmakers in a moment. We do want to thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. One of our scheduled guests next week is Kentucky Transportation Secretary Jim Gray. We invite you to join us for the latest news on air and online at WKYT.com and on our WKYT News app, and we hope you make it a good week ahead.